Saturday, August 26, 1346. After a long march from Cherbourg to the town of Crécy, the invading English forces faced off against an overwhelmingly larger French and Genoese army. It was a battle royale that shook France to the core and established an English presence in France that was to last for over 100 years. The English were having difficulty with the failing alliance with Flanders, bankruptcy due to the cost of subsidies to the German princes, and maintenance of an army in France. In the French fleet raiding settlements along the northern shore of the English Channel. A stunning victory at Sluys on June 24, 1340 changed that as the French fleet was nearly destroyed, securing both sides of the Channel for the English. On July 12, 1346, Edward began his invasion of France, landing near Cherbourg in Normandy and dividing his army into 3 regiments. The first was under the command of Edward's son, 16-year-old Edward of Woodstock, Prince of Wales, the second under William de Bohun, 1st Earl of Northampton, and the third under the king himself as a reserve force. 2 weeks later, the English had sacked the town of Caen and held the mayor hostage. After marching 300 miles and skirmishing along the way with the local levies of peasant troops, Edward's weary army arrived near Crécy on August 25, 1346, poised to make a stand near the forest located there. After a night's rest, the English army took the high ground between the towns of Crécy and Wadicourt. Incorporating strategies learned by fighting the Scots, Edward ordered his army to fight on foot. It is unknown exactly how large Edward's total forces were. However, it is estimated between 9,000 and 12,000, with approximately 7,000 of them a mix of English and Welsh archers. Edward spent part of the morning and early afternoon exhorting his troops with personal visits, which lifted the spirits of the flagging army. Edward deployed his forces in a 2,000-yard wide front facing east. The prince's contingent was to the south, nearest to Crécy, and consisted of approximately 1,000 men-at-arms, 2,500 archers, and 1,000 Welsh spearmen. Prince Edward's relative youthful inexperience was offset by the wisdom of his aides, Thomas de Beauchamp, the 11th Earl of Warwick, and John de Vere, the 7th Earl of Oxford. On the Wadicourt side, to the northeast of the prince's forces, was de Bohun's division of 1,000 men-at-arms, 3,000 archers, and an unknown number of spearmen. The king grouped his reserve forces to the northwest of the prince's with 700 men-at-arms and some 2,000 more archers. Although exact establishment of the archers is up for debate, it is believed that the archers formed on the flanks of each division with hastily dug pits to the forward of the English line. These pits, a trick learned from the Scots at Bannockburn, would serve to break any cavalry charge by the French. The French army came upon them later in that day, having followed from the crossing of the river Somme at Abbeville. As in the case of the numbers attributed to the English army, the strength of the French forces can only be estimated as between 30,000 and 72,000 strong, with perhaps as many as 6,000 Genoese crossbowmen. The French army outnumbered the English anywhere from 3-1 to 6-1. After the delay in crossing due to the tides, the bridges across the Somme had been burned at Philip's command to resist Edward's advances. The French were eager for battle and the glory of the victory. Even though Philip had been advised to wait until the following day, the impatient French nobles ordered the advance of the Genoese mercenaries, which were still in preparations after the long march. The first attack occurred around 4 p.m. and approached from the southeast, their pavises still stored. On wagons, the unprepared and footsore Genoese charged uphill to the English positions. Several things happened which helped to break that first charge. The rain, which had been falling all day, stopped, leaving the field a muddy mess, and the westerly sun broke from the clouds, dazzling the charging Genoese. About 150 yards out, the English archers began raining arrows on the Genoese, who suffered heavy casualties. Furthermore, some scholars contend that the brief shower had damaged the strings of the Genoese crossbows, inhibiting their ability to counterattack, whereas the English archers had kept their bowstrings protected by simply unstringing their bows. Finally, Edward had with him several cannons, whose noise only added to the confusion. Stunned by the treatment, the Genoese mercenaries sounded a retreat, only to be run down by the forces of the infuriated Charles d'Alençon, Philip's brother. Again the longbows sang, the bodkin-tipped arrows piercing the armor of the French gendarmes, causing devastating losses and claiming the life of d'Alençon. The French charged the English position 15 times, some accounts say 16, and each time was turned away. Jean Froissart in his chronicles wrote, "The lords and knights of France came not to the assembly together in good order, for some came before, and some came after, in such haste and evil order, that one of them did trouble another." One such attack was led by the blind John I, King of Bohemia and Count of Luxembourg, who, in searching for his son Charles, charged into the thick of the fighting tied to his escort of 2 knights. Valiant as it may have been, the action cost him his life. The next day, Prince Edward would honor the fallen John by adopting part of John's coat of arms, 3 white plumes, and John's motto, Ich dien, I serve. During the course of the fighting, Prince Edward was at one point hard-pressed, and several of King Edward's nobles asked to ride to the heir's aid. Upon determining that the prince was not in immediate danger of death, the king's response was, "Return to him and to them that sent you hither, and say to them that they send no more to me for any adventure that falleth, as long as my son is alive. And also say to them that they suffer him this day to win his spurs. For if God be pleased, I will this journey be his in the honor thereof, and to them that be about him." This statement of faith by the king in the abilities of the prince, the stance that the heir was not to be pampered, and the earlier interaction with the mostly peasant forces contributed to the high morale of the exhausted English army late in the day. Finally, wounded and exhausted, Philip VI retreated under the cover of darkness to the castle at Broye, where after a short refreshment, he continued at midnight onwards to Amiens. Only 60 men accompanied Philip to Amiens. The rest of his forces lay dead or dying or else scattered to the 4 winds. The next morning would reveal that an estimated 12,000 French lay dead or dying on the battlefield, although some claim as many as 30,000 were killed. The yeoman archers went amongst the dying and dispatched them with daggers to the armpit, thus violating the codes of chivalry, since knights were to be ransomed rather than killed by peasants. This action greatly displeased Edward, as he hoped to ransom the captive and injured French nobles. Amongst the French dead were 11 princes, including the aforementioned Charles d'Alençon and John of Bohemia, and 1,200 knights, the cream of the French nobility. The outcome of the Battle of Crécy was a decisive victory for the English forces over the French. Despite being outnumbered, the English employed superior tactics, including the use of longbowmen, defensive formations, and strategic positioning on high ground. The French army suffered heavy casualties, including many noble knights, while the English losses were comparatively light. The resounding English victory at Crécy established their military supremacy over the French and contributed to the overall momentum of the 100 Years' War. It marked a significant turning point in the conflict, demonstrating the effectiveness of infantry and archers in medieval warfare and paving the way for further English successes in the war.